Throughout his career, Arijit Mukherji has been able to learn, innovate, and lead. As the CTO of SignalFX, he gets to do all of those things at once. On this episode of IT Visionaries, Arijit details his rise through the tech industry, including a number of years at Facebook in the midst of its massive growth. Plus, he explains why he wanted to take a risk and join SignalFX, and what it was like rising from employee number one to the role of CTO. Enjoy this episode. This podcast is sponsored by the Lightning Platform by Salesforce. Salesforce just introduced the Lightning Platform Mobile, the low-code mobile app development platform that empowers anyone to easily build, publish, and manage AI-powered mobile apps for employees and for customers. Find out more at salesforce.com/buildmobileapps.
Welcome to another episode of IT Visionaries. I'm Ian Faison, Chief Content Officer here at Mission.org. In studio, Arijit, how's it going?
Going pretty well. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So this is our second interview with someone on the technical team at SignalFX. We had Rajesh in here talking about being the chief architect and what that means. And now we're going to have you come in here and talk about what being the CTO means. And also we're going to touch a little bit on like what IT means at SignalFX, because I think it's a little different. As a company that's, born in the cloud and everything, what that kind of means. But we're going to get into a ton of stuff from your background in engineering. You've worked at some really cool companies, and we'll get into all that. But first, how'd you get into technology?
How did I get into technology? I think it actually started when I was in 6th grade. We had our computer studies class. That was an optional class that some of the students could do. And I selected computer studies. And then back in the day, back in India, so my dad got me a little, Sinclair Spectrum, ZX80s and so on. Anyway, those used to be those little home computers that you could run.
Yeah.
It had 64 kilobytes of memory. It was pretty advanced. Anyway, so he got us one of those, and that's kind of what got me on the path to programming, and that interest remained. So when I went to school, sort of the electronics and computer science is what my background ended up being. But it all started back in the day. My dad actually encouraged this interest a lot. So he used to buy me these super expensive Time Life series books on computers and technology. And I think that was really formative, at least for me.
Do you think that your kind of like early career interest in engineering, interest in technology, it leads you to this place where you get an MS from UC Davis in computer science. You're kind of going down that traditional route. When did startups start becoming something that you were interested in?
Interesting question. So, when I was graduating, when I graduated from UC Davis, you obviously look around and you see, what companies are out there. And I graduated back in 99. So this is like the peak of the internet boom days. Like if you remember, like, the more loss you made, the better the company did, and lots of IPOs. It was like crazy times. And of course, I also applied to some startups as well as to some larger companies. I got offers from two. One was a startup and one was Cisco. And I've regretted the decision, and then again, maybe not so much later. But I ended up joining Cisco because when I went to interview there, I was very impressed by just the campus and the scale of things. It felt like, wow, like these guys have it made. This is amazing. Yeah. It's a different matter that startup went on to be a very, very successful IPO. And I thought, well, maybe I made a mistake, but in the end, it doesn't really matter as much. But then, time goes by, and at some point I'm thinking, well, I'm working in this big company, but I'm in Silicon Valley. This is where, action is. This is where you stay. Of course, it's expensive to stay, but there's so much opportunity. If I remain in a big company, then am I really exploiting the opportunity that's around me? Like if I'm going to keep on working just in a big company, might as well move somewhere different and have a great quality of life and so on. And that's kind of what got me thinking that maybe I should change some scenery. And that's kind of what got me into Facebook. And then Facebook was an amazing ride. It was
this was
great
early
experience.
days.
This was early days. Yeah. So I went there end of 2007. So back in the day, it was obviously not a done deal. MySpace was ruling the roost, and then Facebook was just this up and coming challenger, a fraction of the size, maybe 40 million active users and whatnot. But the company did have like very big ambitions. Actually, there's an interesting story about Facebook if you want to hear. So it happened when my wife was visiting back in India, meeting her family, and I was up here doing nothing better to do. So I decided, let me go ahead and apply at some companies. And I applied to Facebook. I got in. And then when she comes back, she's on the phone with her dad. Says, "Hey, Dad, Arijit changed his job and he's joined this company called Facebook. And because the phone lines were probably not great, he heard sex book." And he's thinking, "Oh my God, what has happened to my daughter? My poor daughter is married to this creep," is probably what he's thinking. And then, of course, it was not the same. But I mean, it was not a known brand. I think that's the point back in the day, especially if you're thinking India. But anyway, so that was very wonderful because I saw a lot of stuff. It was very exciting. It was a lot of growth. It was an amazing place to be. And I was there for almost 5.5 years or so. And then that's when I'm thinking, wow, if I enjoyed this experience so much, why not try something even smaller? Like, why not try to see what happens when a company grows from like nothing to something, right? And that's kind of what got me interested. And that's kind of why I joined SignalFX in the end.
So how big was Facebook when you started? Like how many employees?
I think it was maybe 400 or a little less than that in terms of total employees. I think the number of engineers in the company was maybe 100 or less. So it was a very, very small community at that time.
We had Jocelyn on. I don't know if you were.
Goldfine? Yeah.
We've had her on for 2 parts on IT Visionaries. She's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah,
She's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's funny that you guys overlapped. So I love that idea of like, hey, found something that worked pretty well. I mean, you had to feel pretty fortunate that you're like, wow, I picked the right company at that point. But picking that second winner is, you're like, hey, my lucky or good? I got on, I stayed on, I did everything I needed to get the job, did a great job. But then thinking about trying to find really, really early stage companies is hard. I mean, I think a lot of our listeners who are thinking about doing things like that could probably say, like, how do you know how to pick something that's going to be good? I
think I'll give the short version of it. The answer is you don't.
Yeah.
But for me, this is kind of how I think it played out. A successful company has a lot that needs to go right in order to make that successful, right? It's not just the technology. It's not just the marketing. It's not just the sales, not just the CEO. Like, you need a lot of things. You need a whole lot of luck at the same time, right? So I think for SignalFX, for me, it was actually not a done deal by any means. A couple of things sort of came together, which I think got me to join. Firstly, so at that point, I was willing. I had appetite to take risk.
Yeah.
But I thought, you know what? I want to go for experience and don't worry about, whether it works out or not. Something has worked out well for me. So let's just take some risk. Let's just try things out. So there was a little bit of that going on in the mind. The area that what SignalFX does is exactly what I worked at Facebook. So I helped build their metrics monitoring system and sort of working on that for quite a while. And so it was exactly in the area that I wanted. It was being founded by the technical co-founder, Phil Liu, who was a friend of mine. We worked together at Facebook for many years. I liked him. He liked me. So it was also with a person that I kind of trust and I respect. And so at that point, I was thinking, look, if I'm going to go to, as a non-founder, if I'm going to go to a startup, this is probably as good as an opportunity to join SignalFX as opposed to something else. Because, all the stars have aligned. Good technology, stuff I'm passionate about, good people. They got funded from Andreessen Horowitz. So, good VC backers and so on. So anyway, so that's kind of why I decided to sort of jump ship and join. Like I said, there was nothing. There was no software, nothing on paper. So everything that we built, we had to build from scratch.
And you were employee number one.
Yes, I was employee number one. I like to say that I did not found the company, but the company found me.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that, and obviously, flash forward to you being CTO. I mean, back then, you can point the dots, now that you're here. But looking back then, I'm sure it was like, hey, we need to build this thing from scratch. Everyone is an individual contributor because we're all so early stage. What was that like to start building, from paper to actually building the product?
I'll tell you, it was some of the most fun times in my working career, right? this is exactly what you join to experience, and that's kind of what happens. So it's great. So first day, I think for me was, assembling some chairs, but that's beside the point.
Assembling chairs?
Yeah, we had to do all of that because, it was just two men and a desk.
You're sitting in our studio right now. For our listeners, like, our studio is set up in a garage. I mean, I carried this table. I'm the one who found it on Craigslist. Painted these walls. Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you.
Yeah, our first office was actually in this place which used to be you could fight digital monsters. It was called Monster Fight Dojo.
Monster Fight Dojo.
Yeah, so that's what was in the place that we first joined. And there was some paint job done to cover that sign, but you could read it still. So it was very, very different. But that's all right. So anyway, going back to how we sort of build things. So we initially sort of had Rajesh joined very soon after I did. There was another guy called Chris who was there. And then Jack was another guy who sort of joined us relatively early on. And there's a few, like a core 4 or 5 of us that then would brainstorm pretty much morning to evening. After a while, when we sort of had the ideas of, this is kind of what we want to bring. One of the things we wanted to do, which is again why this is fun, is we did not just want to repeat what we have built in the past. So our goal was that, look, we've built something that was successful, but at the same time, there were things that we could have done better. There were features or things that it could do that potentially a lot of people would ask for that we did not have in the old system. Why not take a fresh approach? Why not do a next generation of that thing? It's a more interesting, technical challenge, more stimulating as well. You build something new. And so that's what happened. So after a while, when we had this sort of the idea of skeleton of what we want to build, then we said, let's divide and conquer. Each of us would take one area of the product that needs to be built, and then we would then go ahead and sort of go deeper into that. But we would always sort of collaborate on a high level, like we'd come back and share our findings with everybody. And then after a while, the development work began, and then it sort of takes a life of its own after a while. Yeah.
Did you ever feel like in kind of those early days when you are building it all, at some point we're going to get bigger and there's going to need to be processes. There's going to need to be like, stuff set up. Or was it just kind of like, let's get to the next milestone. Let's get built to the next thing. Let's get to the next customer. You know what I mean?
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. So in general, lack of process is very liberating, as you might imagine.
100%.
It's a lot of fun. You can do whatever you want. It's very free. But of course, you're right. Like, you cannot build something without having some processes in place. In that sense, I think I'll say that we are lucky in some sense, in the sense that the core team, the original first, I would say 10, 15 engineers at SignalFX, they're all experienced people who have been around the block, who've seen a lot of things, who've seen things done right as well as wrong. And so I think we had especially because of some of the engineers that we hired that joined us, like we had a sense for doing things a little bit more systematic way, relatively from the beginning, in terms of the kind of tooling we had, the kind of processes we had. It wasn't like super advanced or anything by any means, but it was still there because, again, we've informed by past experience of working and seeing, these kind of systems being built. And so, yes, there was a little bit of process, but I will agree with you that needs to change over time. So right now, for example, we are far more process oriented in our development process than we used to be. And that's also a requirement because as the company matures, you need to become more systematic in some sense. So we are going through that evolution. I think we are doing that quite well, actually. But yeah, so we are going through that whole evolution right now. But I think we started from a relatively decent place, which I think allowed us to sort of make this transition more easily without a whole lot of disruption.
How did the process work from going from everybody kind of being individual contributors to now you are an executive, you were the CTO? Like, what was that kind of like?
Yeah, so it kind of happened somewhat organically. So, the way it happens is at some point, like, we are obviously hiring and the company is growing. We were quite deliberate in how we hired, especially within engineering. We would probably average an engineer a month, if not even that, perhaps for the first 4 or 5 years. So we were very deliberate in who we hired. So we grew slowly in the beginning. But then as the teams grew and so on, at some point, I found myself, Rajesh found himself like being less hands-on and a little bit more of a, just looking at whether the projects are running well, a little bit of sort of the people management and so on. So started coming in. It was all very informal. So our goal was to maintain a flatness to the structure as long as we could. Because we felt that was very desirable, because it's part of the small startup experience. If you can bring somebody in and say, you're going to report to, the CTO, and, everybody's got, so we don't have any titles, for example, so it's very flat. So everything was sort of somewhat informal, but roles were slowly being formed over time, right? And then at some point, that it starts becoming more and more, where I started becoming basically managing a couple of the functions within the team. And then 4 years or so after the company was started, Phil decided to take a step back. His children were growing up, going to high school soon, so he wanted to spend some time with his family. At that point, so then there was a need for a CTO. And because, I've been there from the beginning, Rajesh has been there from the beginning, so we sort of became CTO and chief architect at that time. I was running engineering because I was sort of in some ways Phil's sort of second in command, so to speak, his right-hand man for a while. And so when he left, sort of running engineering on an interim basis until we hired our excellent sort of VP of engineering, Leonid. And when that happened, so we had this troika in place. So with Rajesh, with Leonid and myself. So that was very interesting. It was an interesting transition for me, because it's a very different role, as you can imagine, especially having a chief architect and a VP of engineering in place. The role of a CTO is something different. So it was an evolution. It was a very interesting transition for me. And so that was actually fun. But anyway, so
Well, and I think it's a really cool story, because, you always hear like no startup is the same, right? Every single startup is its own unique, little flower in this world. And I think it's super true that there's not really a rule or set of rules or principles that you can just slap onto anything. Each one is totally different, and each one is going to have a different founding story. Each one is going to have, different sort of things. And to get caught up in the titles and the bureaucracy and things like that, rather than, focusing on your customers, building things that they want, that sort of stuff. I think you kind of get wrapped up in, I think, the kind of just startup, like Hollywood startups, like the professionalization and the glorification of things, rather than, at the end of the day, it's a bunch of people doing work and trying to get the job done. And it seems like, from everyone that we've interviewed at Signal, obviously we've interviewed, Mark Craney and Tom Buda, the CMO, Mark Craney, the COO, you and Rajesh. It just seems like everyone is about getting the work done and is about doing what you're here to do, not here for the startup theater,
You're exactly right. I'll tell you this. So it's really about doing what's right for the company, as you said. I was perfectly happy not being CTO. If Phil was here, he would continue to have been that, and that's fine too. So because I feel of the company as like almost like a baby, in the sense that you've been from the beginning, you've sort of let it grow. You care about the company a lot, and so you want to make sure you do things that are good for it. And personal stuff happens, it doesn't happen. It's sort of it's not really the main driver, right? But it's also true that if the company does well, like if the company grows, then opportunities necessarily will open up, right? And so that will happen organically. It doesn't have to be, at least in my opinion, like so planned, and things just happen. If you're there, if you're good, if you're doing work that's important for the company, then opportunities open up for you. And that's kind of what I would say, perhaps, right?
What were some of the things that surprised you as you grow? Like, I would imagine that going into board meetings as CTO feels a little different than being an individual contributor, or, whatever it is. There's those kind of situations that come up where it's like, okay, now this title actually means something to other people that, internally we might not have ever cared about, but externally is a big deal.
Yes, it is. I don't feel any different.
Yeah, right.
But yes, the title does make a difference. Yes, so board meeting experiences, especially initially, were very interesting. Obviously, being in this role, I now get exposed to many other sort of associated things on the business side of things, for example, things like fundraising and so on. And it's fascinating to see how that part of the work, the world works in some sense, because while you're working on technology, while you're coding and so on, or even managing, like you still sort of, your environment is still the technology stuff, technical stuff itself, but there's so much else that are going on. So, for me, the fascinating bit is seeing how businesses work and businesses succeed and what are the challenges. And I also get obviously a lot more visibility into what happens on the sales side, on the marketing side. And to me, that's sort of fascinating. It's just that that exposure that one gets. Obviously, my role also has become far more external facing. That is also interesting, transition in the sense that I didn't know I enjoyed talking publicly as much as I perhaps do. That was sort of a revelation. At the same time, you can have very meaningful conversations. People will seek you out to sort of, share ideas, discuss things. So yes, so this title does sort of make a difference as far as how others will perceive you in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, both Rajesh and Mark talked about how you jump on sales calls all the time or, talk to customers all the time, things like that traditionally, I'm sure you didn't think that
right.
you were necessarily going to be doing back, when you're employee one. But I think it's one of those things that I think a lot of, CIOs and CTOs that we talk to on the show, when they're first starting, a lot of times they're taking, they've been at a point in their career where they become the role that, they, apply for a job, go from VP of IT to CIO or, VP of engineering to CTO.
Mm-hmm.
When you're born in the company and you've had the experience that you've had in your career and you become that, it's just a different set of experiences that bring you to that point. And then you have this opportunity to look up and say, well, what are my peers doing? What are other CTOs doing? How do they organize their teams? How does all of this stuff play in? Do you have, now that you've, been in the role for a while, are you starting to develop that network of peers that are in similar roles that kind of, how do you talk to the board? How do you do these sort of things?
I have a few. It's not extensive by any means at this point, but I do have a lot of friends who are also in similar positions in other companies, and we will meet and shoot the breeze every now and then. So yes, there's a little bit of that happening. At the same time, as you said earlier, it's also a case-by-case basis. Every company is different.
Yep.
For example, you will find that in many companies, the CTO is also the head of engineering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they have that function. So they're far more operationally focused. In our case, because we have our VP of engineering, because we have a chief architect, in my case, it's less of that and more of. So I think one has to find that right balance and the right sort of agenda for oneself, right? Because at that level, the CEO is not going to tell me every day, like, you, Arijit, go and do X or Y. It's something that I figure out, right, for myself. And it has to be based on the context that's around me, right? And so that's sort of part of the whole process. Especially initially, it was important for me to figure out because, one fine day, you're the CTO. Right? Yeah,
exactly, right? Like, there's no roadmap. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I think I was getting at with the question of, like, one day you're on a product roadmap or trying to deliver that. And the next day, it's just like blank space in front of you. And you're like, wait, I got to figure out what are the right things to do. Where do I look at those cues? I wanted to talk a little bit about IT at SignalFX because something we touched on a little bit with Rajesh, you and I talked, before we hopped on air here about it. It's a little different how you structure. Obviously, you're born in the cloud, so that makes infrastructure completely different. How do you view like internal processes in IT at SignalFX?
So there's sort of two ways to look at it. So there's the information technology that we are using ourselves in our day-to-day work, right? So our laptops, our connectivity, and so on, all of that. At the same time, we are also running a SaaS service that's running in the cloud, right? And so with us, we took from the beginning a kind of a minimalistic, simplistic attitude towards the IT, the technology that we use on a day-to-day basis. For example, we don't have tethered Ethernet connections anywhere. We decided it's going to be wireless, and wireless is going to be good enough, fast enough. We don't run any servers, so on, like within ourselves, because it's all in the cloud. Everybody gets a laptop. Everybody gets connected to the wireless. It's done, right? So in that sense, obviously, as we are scaling up, like, you have to have other sets of tools. You have to have asset management, security, this and that. So there's a lot of other stuff that comes in. So now we have an IT function. But in our case, the IT function reports up to the finance department.
That's so interesting.
Right? Because they're in charge of facilities and various other things. So that's very interesting. And on the engineering side, on the product side, on the SaaS side, we run in the cloud. And so since that's something, because we are obviously a DevOps shop where we are producing code, we are operating it. So that function necessarily has to be within engineering, right? So we do have a function to sort of manage our usage of the cloud, both in terms of the kind of tools that we use, also like keeping a track, because where finance will come in is cost management. We cannot just use as much resources as we want. However, we may like it too. So there's some amount of interaction that's obviously always going on, because there's a business aspect of our cloud footprint that's important for the company to manage. But for the most part, it's all managed by engineering on the cloud side. So it's two different. So we don't have any CIO, so to speak. Right.
So somebody from, sales or marketing wants a product. Do they just go get it? Talk to the CFO, go get it?
Kinda. Yeah. So everybody gets a budget, and then, you need a, Salesforce tool, a marketing tool, etc. We have very strong leaders on the sales and marketing side. Mark Cranny, we have Tom Buta, and so on. And so we are, they're empowered to go make the right calls and get the right tools, whatever is necessary to run the business.
Before we get some lightning round action here and finish with the rest of the questions, I do want to go back to Facebook for a quick second. Any stories from Facebook that were particularly interesting when you were there? You saw massive growth from the time that you were there and there for a good while. Anything particular that stood out?
Yes, quite a few things actually. The Facebook experience was very, very interesting for me because a couple of things happened, right? So first of all, when I joined, as I said, it was a very small company. It's like I said, less than 100 engineers, 40 million plus something active users. But when I joined, I still remember my first day, we had this onboarding, and it was done by Chris Cox, who was sort of the chief product officer eventually. Very, very sharp guy, amazing guy. And he's talking about the social graph. And he's saying, look, humans are connected through a social graph, and our goal is to build the social graph of the world. And I felt, wow, that's very ambitious. Here you are with just 40 million users within US potentially, and you're talking about building the social graph of the world. Like, the cynic in me was like, yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
But it ended up being true. So there was this drive to really, I feel like there was so much vision within the company of where they wanted to go. And it was not just things for getting some ad dollars, but there was some kind of a mission the company had. And over time, it kind of worked out to be true, right? Another thing that was very interesting to me was that, and a lot of my friends would also ask me the same question. You're going to Facebook, it's just a website. Like,
totally.
What can it be? Like, how much interesting work can that be? Like, how are you going to make money? But that's a separate point. And so there was a little bit of a minimization of like the technical challenge there. Like, they would really question my decision. And then what I found is there was far more hardcore computer science and interesting work happening at FB than, for example, I saw at Cisco.
Yeah.
Because I was not in the switches and router stuff, and I'm sure Cisco does amazing things. But for the most part, when you build a product, it's mostly about getting it to work. You're not going to have millions of users. So things like scale and performance become less critical than making the feature work. While at Facebook, because of the sheer size of their users, like, it was just very different. So the amount of like hardcore technical computer science that I saw there was another thing that was very mind-blowing for me. Another thing I'll say is, again, while we are on the topic, by the time I joined the company, I had almost 10 years of work experience. So I was like kind of out there. I've seen some stuff. And one of the things that I would feel is, well, here's this company that's a lot of young engineers, mostly straight out of school, a year or two of, experience. They haven't seen a whole lot. And a lot of times they would say or do things that you feel are kind of obvious or obviously wrong, right? And, one could take a cynical view of that, right? But what I found is that unless you sort of unlearn some of the things and sort of take a fresh look at challenges, you're never ever going to conquer new ground. I'll give you an example. So at some point, everybody knows Facebook runs on PHP, and PHP is, people have various opinions about that language, but it was not a super high performing language. And the company was growing so much at some point, we didn't even have enough servers to serve the users. But at that time, the company had started a project to compile PHP into C code and then run it as like binaries, the compiled binaries. And when that project got started, I was like, this is a fool's errand. It's not going to happen. This is just PHP is much too complicated. Again, contrary to my expectations, it ended up being successful. And actually, that's the project that actually allowed us to improve performance and keep on with the growth and not fall over. At some point, this was actually saved the company's ass, so to speak.
That's funny.
And so there has been so many cases like that I feel, like I said, like it's changed me in a many way in how I observe how things evolve, how things get made. And so it's been like a very, very interesting and, enriching experience in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are so many lessons from, early days there. Same thing with Snapchat, where you just look at the product being something that, like, I think people of a certain age were like, why would you want a photo that disappears, for example?
Right.
Right. Why would you want to, or like, why would you want to check into where you are? Like, why would you want to do these things? And I think that it's the same thing with the actual technology being worked on. A lot of times we just bring our baggage into the decision-making process of like, but why would you do that? Why would you want to have, or why would you think that is possible?
Right.
And what you realize is that the people who, push those limits or try to explore those things. And I think ultimately it comes back to having a business model where you can take chances. If you don't have the headcount to be able to throw on a project like that, then it's really tough to be able to run those type of experiments.
Yes, because taking chances, it blows my mind how fast our world is changing now.
Yeah.
Like, it's sometimes scary. Even on the technical side, like you will see companies like Nokia, for example, that was like the number one phone company ruling the world 2007. Within 5 years, 6 years, whatever, they just obliterated, right? And the pace of change is just like shocking. Even I do talks, and then one of the things that it blows my mind is nowadays it's all about cloud and Amazon and Google and what have you. Amazon Cloud came out of beta 10 years ago. In 10 years nowadays, if that's all you will hear at any conference, that's all people are building. In 10 years, it just entirely changed. So I think it's very, very important for companies to be taking chances, right? So, and you will see that nowadays, if you look at the companies like Google and Facebook, they always have no end of projects that they will try.
Oh, yeah.
And 90% of them will fail. And the cynical view is that, look, they're trying all these things and they're not succeeding and blah, 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 blah. But my view is at least they're trying. And even if one or two of those succeed, that's great, as opposed to not trying and then falling over and dying at some point, right? So it's almost become a requirement in order to have any kind of long-term success in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, you can't learn in the classroom. Like that's like one of the oldest things. Like we thought that you learned in the classroom, but you don't. You learn by doing it in real time. And it's like, if you don't actually try to do those things and give it a fair shot, then how are you going to learn how are you going to get feedback on this thing?
Yes.
And ultimately, like, you learn so much when you have those efforts that don't work. Like all of the engineers or whoever it is on those projects learn a ton about why it didn't work. It's kind of one of those, how many things were created in life on accident, right? Whether it's penicillin or whatever, right?
Yes.
I mean, half the inventions are by accident. How do you create room for serendipity in your team to be able to have those projects being worked on and push innovation?
Yes. So it's a mix of different things. I think one needs to get inspired. One of the things that I like about the company, and especially I get to do much more because of my role, is to meet with customers, go to conferences, meet with customers, prospects, and just see what people are doing and what kind of problems are they facing. Because unless you hear them or unless you hear about what people are trying, sometimes they trigger ideas, right? So that's something that we as an engineering team like to do. In our case, it's also interesting because our product is kind of technical. It's a little bit advanced. So typically, we don't see the kind of features or functionalities that we have with our customers. So what that means is, unlike traditional product management where the customer will say, I want a burger of this size with this taste and whatnot, and you just take their survey and then try to build it. In our case, it's really understanding the customer's use cases, the problems, and then figuring out because they may not know, they may not tell you what the right thing is. So there's a lot of that interaction that number one is important for us to do. The second is we obviously are, again, an engineering bunch. We have lots of engineering technical discussions within the company. We have tech talks and so on. The third thing we do is we have these hackathons, which have become pretty standard now in the Valley. And so we do that too. We actually do long ones. We do 3-day long hackathons because that way you can get something substantial done. And then we plan them ahead. So, people can submit ideas and they can canvas for others to join them because not everything can be done by a single person. So it's like a big production thing. So we do that I think once a year. And then at that point, again, a lot of interesting ideas will come up. So we sort of, at this point, we are also within the engineering organization. We've set the process up so that we can do exploratory sort of investigations on certain ideas and so on, not necessarily have them in the product plan, but have the exploration part of our roadmap, so to speak. So we're sort of trying to set up both the process as well as some of the other things around it to try new things. But it's a lot of also just looking around, seeing, following others and looking at what's sort of new coming on. We will get influential, sometimes speakers or, representatives from other companies or other open source projects to come and talk to us. So it's a mix of various different things.
What are your roles and responsibilities as CTO at SignalFX, and what are the type of customers that you're working with?
I consider myself SignalFX's many-headed hydra in some sense, in the sense that I have 4 or 5 different areas that I sort of engage with, especially given, as I mentioned, we have our engineering VP, we have a chief architect. So my role is to sort of combine product management, engineering, sales, marketing together. That sort of be the focal point of some of that. So in terms of what I do, I meet with customers because, again, we meet with a lot of enterprise large customers who have very progressive thinkers. And so they want to talk to us on a very authentic technical level. So I do that a lot, obviously talk to customers. On the marketing side, this is very important because I feel like part of my role is to make observability a thing. Because there's a huge part of the world where it's still maybe not as advanced as it can and should be. And I feel that as the world sort of becomes more modern and becomes more cloud native, it's a function. I consider myself an evangelist in some sense, right?
Absolutely.
Not only speaking about the company, not necessarily, but talking about observability and how to do it right, what the challenges, just informing. So that's a big part of that. On the product management side, as I mentioned, because I get to meet a lot of customers, I do get insight into what their challenges are, what they're looking for. So I bring that experience back to engineering. And on the engineering side, because again, that's kind of what I was doing before this role here, I definitely keep a track of especially the major efforts that are going on. I'm part of we have an architecture council that Rajesh is the lead of. So I'm a member of that because it's very important for me to not only bring my experience in, but also keep track of what's going on within the engineering organization so that then I can represent that and I can have substantive discussions with customers and prospects. So it's sort of 4-5 different things.
And give an example of one of the SignalFX customers and kind of how they use the platform. I don't know if you can. I don't know.
I can talk about some. We have lots of sort of so-called enterprise logos, like large customers that like to use us. For example, the latest one, Atlassian, is a very well-known company, very successful company. But one I'm going to talk about is the one I can name right now is, let's say, consider Yelp. So Yelp is a long-term customer of SignalFX. They're actually one of our original beta partners.
Oh, wow.
And they are very advanced. They're actually very fantastically advanced in sort of how they do their operations and their monitoring. And that's why they sort of selected us, because they liked our tool and we were able to scale. So what they do is very interesting. So they will, a lot of times when they deploy Yelp, when the code changes, you know what they do? They will deploy a brand new Yelp.
Oh, wow.
Because it's all on Amazon, and they shut down the old one if things look good. It is called blue-green deployments. And so you can imagine how much data we have to handle suddenly when things like that happen. So they're doing things like that. They're using what's called infrastructure and monitoring as code, which is a new thing that where you do everything programmatically. The configurations are all stored in source control, so you know exactly what changed. It's called immutable infrastructure because you deploy what's in your Git, so to speak, and then that doesn't get changed. You can go and you don't make tweaks and such as much. You just deploy new things and you shut down old ones. So it makes operations easier. So they're one of the guys who are at the forefront of that. The pattern we see with large companies like that is they will have a central team that is in charge of observability as a thing within the company. they're not the SREs that are manning the pagers or they're looking at, individual services. They're just enabling the rest of the company to do their job well. And they're working with us to set up the right tools and so on. So that's a very interesting use case. Another one is a large apparel manufacturer that is now selling direct to consumer. So they will have these flash sales where, millions of shoes may get sold in like a few minutes.
Yep.
And that is also fantastic. That's entirely different use case again, right? And they selected us because there was nobody else who could give them like the per second view. And the per second view is important because if the flash sale is going to run out in less than 5 minutes, what good is a dashboard or an alert that fired after a few minutes? Like it's zero good, right? And so that was also so we get to see very interesting and varied use cases and all across the board. So we have, Yelp is a digital company for recommendations. Apparel manufacturers are different. We have financial customers. We have all kinds of. So anybody who's going to the internet, who's becoming digitally transformed, going to the cloud, they need tools like this. So, my view is like, it's like flying an airplane. Back in the day, you rode a horse and buggy and you need a little, windshield was good enough. It was your single pane of glass, as I like to say. But if you're driving something that's more advanced, which modern clouds and containers, etc., are, you need an associated set of tools that will let you do that successfully. You cannot drive a Ferrari without any dials, right? It just doesn't get done. And so I feel that we are part of that ecosystem that is making this more modern, brave new world sort of successful by enabling that to happen in some sense, right?
I love the quote from the VP of engineering at Yelp said, for the vast amount of metrics we produced, SignalFX was the only solution we tried that didn't fall over in the first week. Yeah. That's pretty good. But I think that's the challenge, right? Is that, there's so many use cases now and it's so complex that if you're not in real time, if you don't have that real-time monitoring, then, that's where we're going for everybody. And if you're not there now, you better be soon.
Yeah, you're right. Because it's shocking how quickly the humans will react on Twitter
when
goodness. They are not happy.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Go ask an airline.
And Tom, especially, like he's also been changing my thinking, just observing, like brand is important. It's very, very, very important. And you cannot let that suffer. And you cannot let humans have bad experience. Because, for example, an apparel manufacturer can sell all their shoes. That's not the problem. It's that whether that experience went well for their customers is what's important. And so real time is key. And then, a lot of times we get asked like, hey, I'm a human. I'm not gonna, it's gonna take me 2 minutes to wake up and, make my coffee and look at your alert anyway. So what does real time matter? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. You're just maybe overselling it. And the answer is that's actually a very wrong way of looking at things. The trend, because of the complexity and the speed of everything, is towards more automation. So at Facebook, we had this project called Facebook Auto Remediation, FBAR, which was a supremely successful project. Ended up, by the time I think I left, maybe 80 to 90%, if not more, of all alerts were auto remediated. Because 90% of all alerts are actually the simple ones where you just have to know to take a predictable action. Well, you don't need a human to come and make the same decision over and over again. You can let the bots do it, which is exactly what happened. That way, humans who are fewer can focus on the hard problems, right? And that's really the trend, is that after a while, I see us moving towards more of a automated self-running cloud for the most part, where things are just going to react and fix themselves. And that's really the brave new future, so to speak, that we're moving towards. And that's where like timeliness in real time is important, because what's happening is the bots can work in seconds, A, and secondly, SLA requirements demands are becoming stricter and stricter, right? So if I want to meet 4 nines of SLA, which any financial institution might want, that's 4 minutes that you have in a whole month for all your problems, from finding them to fixing them, deploying it, all of that, 4 minutes in a month. So yes, you do not have minutes anymore, right? And so automation is the way, and I think analytics and real timeness are sort of key drivers for those things to be successful in my mind.
Let's get into the lightning round. These questions are fast and easy. You have no idea what's coming, but they're fast and easy, just like the Lightning platform from Salesforce. You can go to salesforce.com/build mobile apps. You can learn more about how to build apps faster and easier than ever before. Lightning questions. Are you ready?
Yes, I am. As ready as I will be.
Number 1, what app are you using on your phone that is the most fun?
I love playing Fruit Ninja.
Fruit Ninja.
I'm on the plane a lot, and then a lot of times I'll just get that out and I'll be playing Fruit Ninja.
My girlfriend loves Fruit Ninja. Shout out to the people at Fruit Ninja. What is your favorite recent book or podcast that you've read or listened to recently?
Podcast I'm currently hooked on. It was a recommendation from Leonid. It's called Business Wars. Oh my God, it's very interesting. So it talks about like business competitions. So like Nike versus Adidas, or Burger King versus McDonald's is the latest one I just heard. And then there was also a fascinating one about Ferrari versus Lamborghini.
Oh, that's
Netflix
good.
versus Blockbuster. I recommend it. In terms of books, I like to read popular science a lot. And a friend of mine suggested this book by a physicist called Carlo Rovelli. And he speaks about quantum something. Basically, he says space is quantized. Even space is quantized. And it's very, very interesting. Like it was a brand new, because I think physics and science is also progressing very, very fast suddenly. So that was a very, very fun read. I think it was called either The Arrow of Time or something like that. It's a very, very fascinating book.
What about your favorite vacation spot?
Yellowstone National Park.
Great.
I've been there 3 times actually. Amazing place.
What do you do for fun?
Obviously, I like to read. I like to cook. I travel a lot. Both my wife and I share that passion.
What's your favorite thing to cook?
Biryani and desserts.
Ooh, we might need to have you back.
There you go.
What thing are you most excited about for the future of technology?
I just want to be there as much as possible to see what the future brings. It's like I said, it blows my mind how quickly things are changing with material science, with DNA and biotech and so on, computer science, like quantum, computers. Like I hesitate to make a prediction about where things will go, but I know that it's going to be very fun and exciting.
What is your best advice for a first-time CTO?
I would say for the first-time CTO, take a bit of time and understand the expectations of your role. Because like I said, the situation is very different from different companies. Ask around, figure out like what the expectation of your role is. That's very important before trying to sort of maybe act very quickly. And then also, I think one must realize that what of those are like play to your strengths, things that you enjoy. It cannot just be because I'm expected to do something that's not enjoyable to me that you should. So I think passion is a force multiplier, personally. So if you're passionate about something, you'll be good at it, you will do it well. And so I think, so figure out what the business needs from you, obviously, understand the expectations, and also focus it towards your strengths, and then try to get help where you're maybe not as passionate about.
I love that. What question did I not ask you today that you never get asked, that you wish you were asked more often?
I think I'm drawing a blank. You've been a very great interviewer.
Well, I mean, I'll take that for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm drawing a blank.
How about what would one of your colleagues say about you behind your back?
Oh, they'll comment on my disgusting jokes. So I have this passion. Actually, it's a passion at this point. It's an obsession, probably, for bad puns.
Oh,
and that's all I can think of. My mind is crooked, and so I'm inflicting them on my coworkers pretty much all the time. And I'm sure they're,
I'm so
cursing me behind my back all the time.
I'm so here for bad puns. I also drop a lot of bad puns into our Slack channel. Arijit, this has been absolutely awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Anything to plug? Well, everyone should check out SignalFX. Anything else?
No, check out SignalFX. Follow me on Twitter, and hopefully I can have some good discussions with you guys about observability. Like I said, this is an area of great passion for me, obviously also for my company. And so, drop us a line and we can chat.
Yeah, maybe we'll do an episode in the not too distant future and just go super deep. I mean, we did a bunch of stuff with Rajesh, but I think that there's some a deep dive on observability that we could do. But awesome. We'll have you back. This has been fantastic.
Awesome. Great. It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Salesforce just introduced Salesforce Blockchain, the industry's first truly declarative blockchain platform integrated into your CRM. Learn more at salesforce.com/blockchain.